The crown of Athens weighed upon Theseus's head, not because of the metal, but because of guilt, the fruit of his negligence that led to his own father's death. A ghost that would haunt him forever, turning the Aegean Sea into a memorial to his grave mistake. Yet the people of Attica did not see him as a negligent son, but as a savior. They revered the hero who had freed them from Crete's yoke, the slayer of the Minotaur, the embodiment of strength and courage. Assuming the throne that was rightfully his, Theseus knew he needed to be more than the hero of songs. He had to become the architect of Athens' future. Firmly established in power, his popular reverence was immense, but he did not let adulation seduce him. The trials on his journey had taught him that true strength did not lie in tyranny, but in justice. Theseus proved to be a king like no other. Wise and magnanimous, he saw power not as a prize, but as a responsibility. In a revolutionary act that would echo for eternity, he initiated a great political reform. The king traveled through the various towns and villages of Attica, using his heroic prestige not to subdue them, but to unite them. Summoning the citizens, he persuaded them to transfer their local councils to a central assembly in Athens, creating a community, a polis. He voluntarily renounced a great part of his royal power, handing government to the people and establishing a system in which all free citizens were regarded as equal before the law. Theseus kept for himself only the supreme command of the army, placing himself not as a master, but as the protector of his people. Under his leadership, democracy flourished in its fertile soil, and Athens became a beacon of prosperity, seen throughout the Hellenic world as the freest and happiest of cities. The kindness in the king's heart, however, was not limited to politics. When terrible news came from Thebes, Theseus did not hesitate. His cousin and childhood idol, the incomparable Hercules, had been seized by a madness sent by the jealous Hera. In his delirium, he had killed his own wife, Megara, and their children. Now, the greatest hero in the world was sunk in a depression as deep as Tartarus, isolated and consumed by guilt. While others feared or shunned him, Theseus set out to offer aid. He found Hercules in a pitiful state, a mountain of muscle and glory reduced to a broken man. With words of empathy and without judgment, Theseus ritually purified him and, more importantly, offered him refuge and unconditional friendship in Athens, reminding him that tragedies imposed by the gods did not diminish a hero's nobility. This act of compassion forged an unbreakable bond of friendship between them. Thus, when Hercules set out on his 9th labor to seek the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, Theseus, eager for adventure and loyal to his friend, went with him. The expedition took them to the shores of the Black Sea, to the land of Themiscyra, a realm ruled solely by warrior women, formidable and proud. After a series of battles and intrigues, Hercules' mission was fulfilled. In the process, Theseus fought the princess Antiope, the queen's sister. Their battle was fierce, yet marked by mutual respect for each other's skill. Captivated by her strength and untamed beauty, Theseus took her as a prisoner of war, or as a reluctant bride. Together they had a son whom they named Hippolytus, a youth who would inherit his father's nobility and his mother's indomitable spirit. However, the Amazons did not forget what they deemed an unforgivable abduction of their princess. Years later, a vast host of mounted warrior women crossed Europe, thirsting for vengeance. They invaded Attica, terrorizing the region with a fury never before seen. They reached the gates of Athens, encamping on the hill that would later be known as the Areopagus, and the city found itself besieged by an army of relentless women. Led by Theseus, the Athenian citizens, inspired by their warrior king, fought with great bravery. At the climax of the bloody battle, Antiope, torn between her former and new loyalties, made her choice. She fought bravely at Theseus's side, defending her husband and her new home. But for this betrayal, she was mortally wounded by a spear from her former sisters. The Athenian victory was heroic, but bitter for Theseus, who mourned the loss of his Amazon queen. After this war, the reputation of Athens and its king became so formidable that no enemy dared invade their lands for the rest of his reign. Despite his responsibilities as king, Theseus's thirst for adventure never left him. He joined the select company of heroes on the Caledonian boar hunt and sailed with Jason and the Argonauts in their quest for the Golden Fleece. His prestige reached its zenith, rivaling that of his great friend, and many referred to him as the Athenian Hercules. Unlike so many other Greek heroes whose flame was snuffed out in youth, Theseus lived to see his glory ripen. And in this phase of his life, he forged another legendary friendship, as intense as the one he had with Hercules. His friendship with Pirithous, king of the Lapiths. Theseus traveled to Thessaly at Pirithous' invitation to celebrate his marriage to the beautiful princess Hippodamia. The feast promised to be a memorable event, gathering the region's most exotic figures. On one side were the Lapiths, rough men of the mountains, known for their courage and for being the first to tame horses. On the other, invited by ties of kinship, were the Centaurs, wild creatures half man, half horse. Both peoples were descended from the infamous King Ixion, and a cloud of ancient, unresolved rivalry hung in the air. The feast began in harmony. Theseus, with his charisma, fraternized with all, drinking toasts with the rugged Lapiths and sharing stories with the curious Centaurs. Wine flowed generously, and music echoed through the great hall. However, the Centaurs, unused to the strong wine being served, soon began to succumb to their most primal instincts. As the drink intoxicated their minds, civility vanished, giving way to lust and violence. The breaking point came when Eurytion, the mightiest of the Centaurs, drunk with desire, decided to abduct the bride. With a bestial roar, he seized the terrified Hippodamia, slinging her across his equine back. The bride's panicked screams were the signal for chaos. The other Centaurs, following their leader's example, fell upon the other women and attendants, overturning tables and spreading terror. Theseus, whose life had been devoted to combating chaos and barbarity, could not bear to witness such savagery. Alongside Pirithous, he led the Lapiths' counter-offensive. The battle, which would become known as the Centaurumachia, was a brutal, improvised clash. With too few weapons at hand, the Lapiths hurled whatever they could. Silver platters, wine amphorae, and heavy bronze jars flew through the air. Theseus, with a hero's deadly aim, lifted a massive jar from a pedestal and hurled it at Eurytion. The jar struck the Centaur's leader squarely on the head, and he collapsed with a shattered skull. While Pirithous drove forward with his spear, cutting a path through equine bodies, Theseus tore the leg from an oak table and wielded it like a club. His presence on the field was decisive. He moved among the monsters with the strength and fury of a demigod, crushing the Centaurs' bodies with his weapon. The fight was bloody and desperate, but the leadership of the two heroes and the Lapiths' determination prevailed. The queen was rescued, and the remaining Centaurs were driven out or slain. Amid the wreckage of the banquet hall, Pirithous turned to Theseus, his body covered in blood and wine. The gratitude in his eyes was immense. On that day, united by blood shed and victory shared, they became more than friends. They became brothers. Their bond, now forged in the fire of battle, would make them inseparable, ready to face any challenge together. A promise that, in their heroic arrogance, would lead them to invade even the realm of the dead. Years had passed and carved furrows into Theseus's face, each line a map of an adventure, a battle, and a loss. The fire of youth that had carried him into the heart of the Minotaur's labyrinth and to war against the Amazons now burned like embers, a steady heat, but without the old flames. He was Athens' hero king, a revered monarch, but an aging one. Since the death of his beloved Antiope on the battlefield, he had closed himself off to love, dedicating himself to his kingdom and to raising the son she had given him, Hippolytus. The palace, once the stage of triumphant returns, had become a place of routine, and memories of a time that would return no more and Theseus felt the weight of the loneliness that accompanies men who outlive their own legends. But in the autumn of that year, fate presented him with an echo of spring, Phaedra, the princess of Crete. At first sight of her, Theseus felt a tremor in his heart. She was the younger sister of Ariadne, the passion of his youth, and she possessed the same Mediterranean beauty, the same eyes that had once belonged to the woman who guided him out of the darkness. In Phaedra's youth, Theseus saw a reflection of himself, a glimpse of the golden years when, with nothing but a sword and his courage, he had defied a monster and won love. That mirage of his past glory was irresistible. With the consent of the King of Crete, happy to seal a lasting alliance with powerful Athens, Theseus married Phaedra and brought her to his city as the new queen. The union, however, revealed stark contrasts. The age gap between them was immense. Phaedra was a young woman at the height of her beauty, the same age as her stepson, Hippolytus. Theseus showered her with honors and affection, seeing in her one last, precious gift from the gods, a chance to relive the passion he thought he had lost forever. But the presence of a third element in that royal house would open a fissure that would shake the kingdom to its foundations. That was Hippolytus, the Amazon's son. The prince was the antithesis of the Athenian court. Despising the city's intrigues and pleasures, he devoted his life to the purity of nature. He had taken a solemn vow of chastity in honor of Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt and patroness of the Amazons, spending his days in the forests with his horses and hounds. Hippolytus's beauty was of an almost divine purity, an austere perfection that made him magnetic and unreachable. And it was this beauty that became Phaedra's obsession. The goddess Aphrodite, enraged by the scorn the prince showed her by denying love and passion, decided to exact a cruel revenge. She lit in the new queen's heart a profane flame, an unhealthy, overwhelming love for her stepson. Phaedra fought against this feeling, consumed by shame and fear. She wasted away, losing sleep and appetite, her body tormented by a fever that belonged to her soul. The only confidant of her terrible secret was her faithful maid. The opportunity for disaster arose when Theseus departed on a long journey. In the king's absence, the atmosphere in the palace grew even more oppressive. Feeling she could no longer bear the weight of her repressed love, Phaedra decided to give vent to the storm in her heart. She waylaid Hippolytus as he returned from a hunt, his face flushed from exertion, exuding the wild purity that tormented her so. With a trembling voice and fevered eyes, the queen declared her love. She spoke of sleepless nights, of her overwhelming desire, painting a future in which they could be united, cast aside the old king, and reign together over Athens, a union of youth and power. To Hippolytus, whose ears knew only the sound of wind in the trees and hymns to Artemis, Phaedra's words were like poison, a profanation of everything he held dear. Loyalty to his father and his vow of chastity were the pillars of his existence. Horrified, he rebuked her with harsh words, calling her proposal outrageous and her love a disease of the soul, before turning from her as if fleeing a plague. Left behind, Phaedra's passion turned to an icy despair, and despair to a fury born of humiliation. The fear that Hippolytus would reveal her shame to Theseus consumed her. She saw only one way to preserve her honor: death. But in a last act of passionate madness and revenge, she decided she would not fall alone. First, with trembling hands, she wrote a letter to Theseus, a final lie that would destroy the man who had rejected her. Theseus returned to a palace in mourning. Instead of the arms of his young wife, he was greeted by wails and the terrible sight of her lifeless body. From a servant's hands, the letter was delivered to him. The contents of Phaedra's final message had a devastating effect. In her elegant hand, the queen accused Hippolytus of attempting to violate her. She wrote that, so as not to be unfaithful to her beloved husband and to escape dishonor, she had no choice but to take her own life. To Theseus, the letter was irrefutable proof. The pain over his wife's death turned, in an instant, into volcanic fury. The world around him went red with rage and betrayal. He confronted Hippolytus in the palace courtyard, brandishing the letter like a weapon. "Here is the proof of your virtue," he roared, his face transfigured by grief. "You, who hide behind a facade of purity, are a monster, a traitor who profaned my house and drove my wife to her death." Hippolytus vehemently denied committing such a vile act, but his words were useless. Theseus, blinded by pain and by fabricated evidence, did not believe his son. In his fury, he turned to the sea, lifted his hands to the sky, invoked his divine father, and cursed his own son. Banished and accursed, Hippolytus departed in his chariot, his heart broken not by his father's wrath, but by the terrible injustice. He drove along the coastal road, carrying a deep hurt with him. Meanwhile, in the palace, Theseus shut himself away with his grief. Later, on that same fateful day, a messenger arrived, gasping and pale, with news that the prince had suffered a terrible accident and was at death's door. As Hippolytus guided his chariot along the shore, a monstrous bull, made of waves and foam, rose from the sea, Poseidon's curse in living form. The horses, terrified, reared and bolted, smashing the chariot against the rocks and dragging the young man's body for a long, agonizing distance. On hearing the news, Theseus feigned a cold indifference, still convinced of the justice of his act. Then Phaedra's maid, unable to bear the weight of yet another death caused by her mistress's lies, ran to the king. Weeping, she confessed the whole truth: Phaedra's secret passion, Hippolytus's rejection, and the lying letter written in revenge. The truth descended on Theseus like a mountain of ice, extinguishing the fire of his anger and leaving only the cold, cutting pain of remorse. The sovereign of Athens rushed to where his son lay, crushed and dying. He found Hippolytus in his final breaths, his broken body a testament to a god's fury and a father's rashness. Shedding bitter tears over the young man, Theseus knelt and blamed himself, his voice choked with sobs, for not trusting the son he himself had raised. With what little strength remained, Hippolytus lifted his hand and took his father's. Looking him in the eyes, the prince, in one last, sublime act of nobility, whispered, "I forgive you, father, from the bottom of my heart. Free yourself from this guilt." With those words, his last breath left him, and Theseus was left alone, an old, broken king, holding the hand of his dead son, the greatest hero of Athens, finally defeated not by a monster or an army, but by his own tragic fallibility. Time has always been the one adversary no hero can defeat, and it had finally caught up with Theseus. The great king of Athens, unifier of Attica and slayer of the Minotaur, felt the weight of years in his bones. Though he still possessed a physical vigor that would put younger men to shame, his hair was now flecked with silver, and the peace he had fought so hard to build for his realm had become, to him, a gilded cage of monotony. Past glory was a ghost that haunted him, whispering of the thrill of a life that seemed left behind. It was in this restless frame of mind that his old friend and brother-in-arms, Pirithous, king of the Lapiths, paid him a visit. Pirithous, equally bored by peace and driven by a reckless nature, sensed Theseus's dissatisfaction and stoked it. Together, the two old heroes, rather than wisely accepting the twilight of their heroic days, decided to set out into the world in search of adventure. They would make a vow. Since both were descended from the gods, they would not content themselves with new mortal brides. They would seize for themselves the fairest daughters of Zeus, taking them by force as proof that their power and will were still superior to other men's. Their winding path, guided by this senseless pact, led them to the city of Sparta, ruled by King Tyndareus. They did not come seeking war, but a particular prize. That day, in the temple of Artemis, a sacred festival was underway. Young Spartan maidens, in light tunics, danced gracefully in honor of the goddess, their movements a blend of ritual and youthful innocence. But among them all, one shone with a light that seemed not of this world. Her name was Helen. She was still very young, yet her beauty was already legend. It was whispered that she was not Tyndareus' daughter, but Zeus's own, who had visited Queen Leda in the form of a swan. Her skin was like alabaster, her hair like strands of gold, and in her eyes was the promise of a beauty so perfect that one day it would drive the world to war. At the sight of her, Theseus was suddenly overcome by desire, a need to possess that divine beauty as a final trophy for his collection of glories. The oath made to Pirithous echoed in his mind, justifying the profane act he was about to commit. With his friend's complicity, they moved with the speed and precision of their youth. In the blink of an eye, the sacred ceremony was broken. Theseus burst among the dancers, seized the young, innocent Helen, and, before the Spartan guards could react, he and Pirithous were already spurring toward their horses, vanishing in a cloud of dust and leaving behind a violated temple and cries of shock. Far from Sparta, the two kings decided their prize's fate. They cast lots to see who would keep the young maiden. Fate, or perhaps the god's irony, favored Theseus. Helen was his. However, the vow was clear. Each must have a divine bride. True to his word, Theseus pledged to help Pirithous find a woman who could match the daughter of Leda. Before setting out on this new and even madder venture, he placed Princess Helen in the care of his own mother, Aethra, instructing her to protect and console the young princess. The search for a second bride, however, proved impossible in the mortal world. They traveled, they listened to tales, but there was no woman whose beauty could even approach Helen's celestial perfection. Frustration began to gnaw at Pirithous, until a delirious, blasphemous idea took shape in his mind. If no mortal was worthy, he would take a goddess for himself, and not just any goddess. He chose Persephone, queen of the Underworld. After all, she too was a daughter of Zeus, satisfying the terms of their pact. That she was the dreaded wife of Hades, lord of the realm of the dead, was no obstacle, but rather the ultimate challenge his boundless ambition craved. On hearing his friend's target, Theseus should have drawn back. He, who had faced so many monsters and learned the god's will, should have recognized the suicidal madness of that plan. But the call of adventure and blind loyalty to his friend spoke louder. The idea of defying death itself, of invading Hades' domain and stealing his queen, was a feat so grand it would surpass even the labors of Hercules, who had not yet dared to invade the Underworld. And so the two heroes, in their recklessness, set out upon the most insolent act of their lives. They descended to the Underworld through a cave, entering a world of darkness and silence. They moved stealthily through the realm of spirits, but Hades had eyes throughout his kingdom, and nothing there escaped his knowledge. It was not long before the two old heroes were captured by Hades' minions and brought into their master's presence. The Lord of the Underworld drew from the intruders the motive that had led them to violate the sacredness of his realm. And upon discovering that they sought to abduct his queen, Hades decreed they should suffer an exemplary punishment. Theseus and Pirithous were forced to sit upon two stone chairs. The instant they sat, a paralyzing cold climbed through their bodies. They were the chairs of forgetting, and the long, slow agony of oblivion began to take hold of their minds. Years passed in the world above. In the Underworld, time had no meaning. Theseus and Pirithous remained there, chained in perpetual darkness, tormented by the wails of souls and the loss of their own memories, destined to remain forever. Salvation came unexpectedly, or at least for Theseus. It came in the form of the greatest of all heroes. Hercules, on his 12th and final labor, descended to Hades to seize Cerberus. Passing by the chairs of forgetting, he recognized his friends with horror. With his divine strength, Hercules freed Theseus from his prison. As the chains binding Theseus broke, a great crash echoed through the underworld. Then Hercules turned to Pirithous, but when he tried to free him, a violent earthquake shook the very foundations of Hades' realm. A roar of divine disapproval echoed through the kingdom, making it plain that Pirithous' fate was sealed. He, the instigator of the madness, would find no pardon. Hercules was forced to leave him behind. Some say that, as punishment for desiring the queen of the dead, he remains there to this day. Others say he was given to Cerberus to be devoured. Theseus, weakened and with a soul scarred by darkness, returned to the surface. But the world to which he returned was not the same. During his long absence, Helen's brothers, the divine twins Castor and Pollux, had invaded Attica with a Spartan army. They rescued their sister and, in retaliation, took Theseus's mother, Aethra, as a slave. Upon reaching Athens, Theseus found not glory, but a realm in disorder and a contested throne. His foolish adventure had not brought back his youth, but disaster and humiliation. Having returned from the world of the dead, the old hero, now in decline and bereft of his former honor's luster, prepared for the melancholy and solitary twilight of his life. Time in the underworld does not move as it does in the realm of the living. For Theseus, the years chained to the chair of forgetting were an eternity of twilight and despair, a slow agony that stole his strength but not the memory of his folly. When Hercules tore him from his prison of stone, Theseus emerged back into daylight, not as a man reborn, but as a ghost. He rose from Hades' gate an old man, his hair white and his skin the pale hue of one who had not seen the sun in a long time. The vigor that had once let him heave up rocks and throttle monsters had been devoured not only by age, but by the touch of Hades' realm. He was now only the shadow of the man he had been, an echo of a distant legend. What he did not know was that, while he was imprisoned, the world of the living had not waited and had gone on its own course. His realm in Attica, the city he had unified and to which he had given democracy, had undergone seismic change. News of his foolish expedition to the underworld had spread, followed by a silence most took to mean his death. His absence created a power vacuum that his enemies did not hesitate to fill. Helen's brothers, the divine Spartan twins Castor and Pollux, marched on Attica at the head of an army to rescue their sister. Without Theseus's leadership, Athens' resistance was disorganized. The Spartans seized the city, freed Helen, and, in revenge, carried off Theseus's mother, Aethra, as a slave. Taking advantage of the chaos and of popular discontent with a king who had abandoned his people for a personal adventure, the Athenian nobility, who had never fully accepted the transfer of power to the people, struck their blow. They dismantled Theseus's democratic reforms and restored the old order. And to reign over Athens, they chose Menestheus, a cunning aristocrat who was a direct descendant of Erechtheus, the ancient dynasty that had ruled the city before Aegeus, Theseus's father, rose to power. Menestheus was a skilled politician. He did not slander Theseus as a monster, but painted him as something perhaps worse, a selfish, irresponsible hero whose adventures had brought war and humiliation upon the homeland. When Theseus finally reached the gates of Athens, he was a stranger in his own land. Children did not recognize him, and adults looked at him with a mixture of pity and resentment. He saw the statues raised in his honor, but they seemed like monuments to a king long dead. He tried to address the assembly, but his voice, enfeebled by time and pain, no longer had its former power. He was confronted not by warriors, but by politicians who accused him of negligence and treachery. He knew, with bitter clarity, that he no longer had the strength to fight for Athens. The fire in his heart had gone out. The city he loved now belonged to another. His only remaining concern was the safety of his sons, Acamas and Demophon, whom he had had with Phaedra. They were his last link to the future, the last vestige of his legacy. Under cover of night, moving like a thief in his own palace, Theseus spirited them out of the city, He entrusted them to a loyal ship's captain with orders to take them to Crete, to the court of their grandfather Deucalion, where they would be safe from Athenian politics. Watching the ship that bore his sons vanish into the dark, Theseus became a king without a kingdom, a father without children, a man without purpose. He himself embarked on a small vessel, intending to travel to his ancestral estates. But a violent storm struck his craft, forcing him to seek refuge on Scyros, where he also had holdings and where King Lycomedes reigned, a man Theseus knew by name and considered an ally. Lycomedes received the old hero with every show of cordiality and respect, offering banquets and the finest chambers in his palace. He listened with apparent sympathy to the tale of Theseus's fall and volunteered to accompany him personally to inspect the vast lands the Athenian owned on the island. What Theseus, in his exhaustion and disillusion, did not know was that Lycomedes' friendship was a mask. The king of Scyros was in truth an intimate friend and political ally of Menestheus, the new king of Athens. What is more, he coveted Theseus's rich properties, wishing to annex them to his own realm. The arrival of the deposed hero was a golden opportunity. Lycomedes saw before him an old man without friends and without power, a problem that could be easily eliminated. One afternoon, under the pretext of showing Theseus the lands that belonged to him, the king led him along a winding path that skirted a very high cliff. The setting sun painted the sky orange and purple, and the sound of waves breaking on the rocks far below was a hypnotic murmur. As Theseus, lost in melancholy thoughts, gazed at the horizon, recalling perhaps the sight of the black sails that had sealed his father's fate, Lycomedes acted. Taking advantage of his guest's inattention, he stepped forward and, with all his strength, shoved the old hero in the back. There was no struggle. There was only a cry of surprise, quickly swallowed by the wind. Theseus, the hero who had faced the Minotaur in the dark, fought centaurs and Amazons, and invaded Hades itself, met his end not on a glorious battlefield, but through the treachery of a petty king. His plunge from the precipice was the unworthy end of an extraordinary life. The body of Athens' greatest hero shattered on the rocks. For centuries, Theseus' reputation was stained by his foolhardy adventures in old age. Poets and historians, though they sang of his youthful feats, often concluded his story with the tone of a warning about arrogance and madness. He became a flawed hero whose glory had been overshadowed by a pathetic end. But the legend of a true hero, like his soul, cannot be imprisoned for long. As Athenian tradition tells, centuries later, when King Darius of Persia sent his vast army to crush the newborn Greek democracy, the Athenian forces, outnumbered, prepared for battle on a plain called Marathon. At the height of the fight, when courage began to waver, the Athenian soldiers claimed to see an apparition. Emerging from the dust of battle, a spectral figure of heroic stature, wearing archaic armor and brandishing a sword, appeared before their lines, leading the charge against the Persians. It was the spirit of Theseus, their founding king, returned from beyond to defend his city in its hour of greatest need. Filling the soldiers' hearts with a supernatural courage, his phantasmal presence led them to a victory that would change the course of history. After the Persian Wars, Theseus's glory was restored. The Oracle of Delphi commanded the Athenians to find the mortal remains of their hero and grant him a worthy burial. General Cimon led an expedition to Scyros, and after a search, found the tomb of a noble man buried with a sword and a bronze spear. There was no doubt. The hero's bones were carried back to Athens in a triumphal procession. They were interred with the highest honors in a magnificent temple at the city's heart, the Theseum. There, at last, at home, rested the greatest of all Athenian heroes. His tomb became a sanctuary, a place of refuge for the poor, the enslaved, and the oppressed, sealing his final legacy not as an adventurer, but as the eternal protector of his people.